This is the second tutorial for 4D part 3. We're going to be taking the data from the reservation form and it's going to be appended to the reservation table. So if we have a look at the reservation table, you can see data here like room ID and visitor ID is going to come from the form. Check-in date and check-out will come from the form. All of that data comes from here. The deposit received, we're told here that it should be set to 0. The date booked, we're told that we should use the current date. And the reservation ID, well, we'll just need to be using the next reservation ID, so in this case reservation ID 41. So we need to create a query that is going to append this data. We'll start off by creating a new query using Design View. And what you'll notice is that when you create that query, it will give you the list of tables, but we don't actually need any tables in there because the query is not actually going to be based upon a table, so we'll get rid of that straight away. What we do need to do though is change the query to become an append query. So I'm going to select append and then we get to choose which table we're going to append to. So we're going to be appending the data, adding the data to the reservation table. What we can now do is down at the bottom here we can choose all the fields from the reservation table for where we're going to be appending data. So we just need to put each of them in one at a time, and then we'll look at how we're going to make reference to each of those fields as we work our way through. So we've just got a couple more to do: check-in date, check-out date and the deposit received. And what we'll do is we'll start with the easy ones first and work our way through. So for the date booked, the question says that we should be using the current date as the date booked. So that's what we're going to focus on doing at the moment, using the current date. So if we go to date booked, we now need to say what we want this to be. Now if I just put in date bracket bracket, that will take today's date and put it into date booked. At the moment you can see it's just calling it EXPR1. You can leave it as EXPR1, expression 1, it doesn't actually matter, but just for tidiness I'm just going to refer that as reservation date. Now what we can do now is we can look and see whether this is working so far. Before we do though, I'm just going to put in that the deposit received should be 0. Again, if I just put in 0, it puts that there, so I'm going to put in deposit received. Right, let's test and see whether this is going to work. So to test it, I can click on Datasheet View, and you can see there it's taken today's date, so that's the date I'm recording this video, and it's put a deposit received of 0. So we've now covered this requirement here, which is for the deposit field to be set to 0. Before we go any further, let's save this query because we don't want to lose what we've done. So I'm going to call this QRY because it's a query, append because it's an append query, and we're appending to the reservation table. Okay, let's go back to our design view for the query and we can have a look now at some of the other fields. So we're going to start off by looking at the room ID. I'm just going to make this a little bit wider so that we can make reference to it. Now if we go back to our form and we have a look at what we set our form up to be, with our room ID we gave it a name and its name was form room. So when we're working with this query, we now need to look at making reference to that form. So I'm going to give this field a name rather than it being expression 1, and we now need to make reference to the form. So if I just start typing in forms and then put an exclamation mark, I can now need to decide what that form was called. Well, it was called new reservation form. So this is making reference to a form, in particular the new reservation form. And then if I use an exclamation mark again, I now need to choose what that specific field was within that form, and it was called form room. Now what that should do is it should pick up the data from the reservation form. So what we'll do is we'll have a look and see if this works when we run it. So from the reservation form, we'll need to open that, because if it's not open, there's no data to look at. And we'll choose a room number 4. We'll go back to our query, and if we view that query, you can now see that it's picked up a room. However, it's come up with this funny symbol. Now this is a bug in Access, and you just need to know that this is going to work anyway. Right? The fact that it's come up with that symbol means that you know it's going to work, and we're just going to have to trust that it will work in that way. Now we'll try it out and we'll see. So if we go back to Design View, we'll go to Run, and by running the query, it will actually tell us that it's going to append some data to the reservation, and if it does that, that's all brilliant. So we'll click on Run. You can see now we've got this message, you're about to append 1 row, and we'll click on Yes, and we get an error message. Okay, now this error message is saying that it can't set a field to null because of a type conversion failure, and it couldn't add to the table due to a key violation. This is because, I'll just say no to that, our booking reservation ID is null, and that's the primary key, and we can't set it to nothing. There's 2 ways we can solve this. One way is to go to the reservation table. So here's our reservation table. Open that in Design View. Remove the reservation ID completely. Do I want to delete the selected field? Yes. It will remove the primary key, that's fine. And then add a new reservation ID that is an auto number, and then it will just get automatically assigned. I'm not going to use that method. You can use that method and that will be fine then, because you don't need to do anything with the reservation ID. So I won't save any changes to that table. The other way is to just find out what the last reservation ID was and add 1. So I'm going to use a function for that. So again, we'll just call this reservation ID. It doesn't matter, it can still be called expression 1 or something. And we're going to use a dmax function. What dmax does is it will find the maximum value. So I'm going to find the maximum value of reservation ID. And notice the syntax I'm using here. We've got to put it in square brackets because it's a field, and we've got to put speech marks around it. And I'm going to be looking that up in the reservation table. Again, speech marks and square brackets. And then when I've found that value, what we're going to do, so that will find the maximum value, which is currently 40, and I found that value, I want to add 1 to it. So this will add 1 to the maximum value of the current maximum value of the reservation ID. So now what we'll do is we'll try running this query. So instead of viewing the query, well, we'll view it first. You can see it's picked up 41. That's great. So we'll go back to our Design View, and now we'll run it and see if it actually works. So I've got here, you're about to append 1 row. Yes. Right. Now let's see if that worked. So if I go to my reservation table and scroll down to the bottom, there it is, number 41. And look, it's picked up the proper number 4 this time instead of that funny symbol that it had before. So I'll just close the we'll delete that record because we don't need it now. So just delete that record, close the reservation table, and now we go through our other fields like the visitor ID. We're going to be using the same sort of thing as the not the reservation date, but as the room ID. So if we go to the room ID, I'm going to copy that and we'll paste it in here and just make a couple of changes. So instead of form room, we're going to call it form visitor because it's still coming from the same form, and instead of calling it room, I'm just going to call that visitor. And then we'll go to the check-in date and the check-out date. So again, I'm just going to call this we'll paste it first of all. I'm just going to call this check-in, and instead of it being form room, we'll call it form check-in. And again here, paste that in again, this will be checkout, and instead of being form room, it will be form checkout. And what it's doing is it's picking up the data from that reservation form. So that's that completed. Let's go back. We'll just save our query before we move on, and we'll look at the reservation form. We need to put some data in there, so let's choose some dates, and we'll choose a visitor as well. So we've got a visitor and we've got a room. Now what we need to do is work out whether our query is going to work. So first of all, we'll view it, which is like a print preview. We can see 41, it's picking up a visitor using a strange symbol, picking up the room number now properly. The dates will always appear blank. Again, it's another bug in Access. If we go back to design view and let's run it, it says you're about to append one row, so we'll say yes. Have a look at the reservation table, scroll down, there it is, row 41, but it hasn't picked up the check-in and check-out dates, so we need to just have a look and see what's going on there. Right, so we'll just zoom out. So as I've always said, I'm quite happy to make mistakes and then try and correct them, and it's also good for you to see those mistakes because you will have sort of similar errors and you'll want to troubleshoot what's going on. So I suspect it's going to have something to do with not the reservation table, but with this query, and it's going to have something to do with what we've named our fields here. So I've named them form check out and form check in. So I'm just going to have a look at the reservation form itself, and we'll go into design view. Let's have a look. There we go, found the error straight away. So I called that form check-in date, and I called this one form checkout date, and didn't put the word date on the query. So if we go back to our query, and we just need to add in at the end of those that it's form check-in date, and here that it's form checkout date. We'll just zoom back out so we can see everything again. Just go back and check that I've got some data in my form. Oh, it's still in design view. If I was to run the query there, that wouldn't work, so let's put that in. So we've now got some data showing. Go back to our query, and at the moment if we go to design up here, we should be able to run this. You're about to append one row, yes. Let's have a look at that reservation table. Let's zoom in and have a look. There we go, record 42. It's got room ID 4, visitor ID 4, it's picking up all of that information. It's just fluke that they were both number 4, and it's got the dates and it's got the deposit received. So that's our append query created and finished. But before you celebrate too much, just make sure we delete these two records that we've added because we don't want them to be there, or you can just go back to the data that you had previously, but we'll just make sure that they are deleted. The next tutorial then will take you through the process of assigning this to the button and making sure it works with